My brother answered the door of my condo wearing my father's old cardigan, the one I'd kept folded on the guest chair because it still smelled like him, and told me I couldn't come in. "Vanessa needs the space," he said, leaning against the doorframe like he owned it. "You know how she gets in the third trimester. The stairs in their place aren't safe, and you're hardly ever here anyway. We figured you wouldn't mind." I was standing in my own hallway with a carry-on and a bag of groceries. I had just driven 4 hours from Ottawa in a snowstorm. I minded. "This is my home," I said. He shrugged. He actually shrugged. "We changed the code, for security. I'll text you the new one when things settle down." Then he closed the door. I stood there for a long moment staring at the number on the door. 14C. The same number I'd memorized when I signed the papers 3 years ago. I'd bought this place myself, a 2-bedroom on the 14th floor in downtown Toronto. $680,000 cash down, $1.1 million total. I was 29. I had worked 6-day weeks for 7 years to do it, and my brother had just locked me out of it while his girlfriend nested inside. Before I tell you what I did next, I want to ask you something. Leave it in the comments. What's the most entitled thing a family member has ever done to you? I read every single one. I went to the Marriott 4 blocks away, and sat on the edge of the bed in my coat for a while, not because I was cold, but because I wasn't sure what to do with my body. I ordered room service I didn't eat. I watched the CN Tower blink through the window. I want to be clear about something. This wasn't a surprise. Not really. I'd been watching my family treat me like a shared resource for years, and I had kept rationalizing it, because that's what you do when you love people. And they've been telling you since childhood that your job in the family is to be useful. My brother is 4 years older than me. He's never held a job for longer than 18 months. He's charming, genuinely charming, the kind of person who can make you feel like you're the most interesting person in the room, and then borrow $300 from you before you notice what happened. My parents adored him, not in the way they tolerated me, carefully, proudly, from a slight distance, but in the full-bodied way you love something fragile. He was their project. I was their investment. 2 years before the door incident, my mother was diagnosed with a compressed disc that required surgery. She was on a wait list for 8 months, and her pain had gotten bad enough that she'd stopped leaving the house. My father's benefits, through his pension, were capped. The surgery was going to cost $14,000 out of pocket between the private clinic, the anesthesiologist, and the physiotherapy after. I paid it. I didn't hesitate. I transferred the money in 2 days and flew home to drive her to the appointment. She held my hand in the recovery room and called me her good girl, and I thought, yes, this is what family does. 6 weeks later I called to check on her, and my brother answered her phone. He was over for dinner. In the background I could hear my father laughing. I asked how Mom was doing and he said, "Great, great, she's great," and then mentioned, casually, that they'd helped him, and Vanessa put a damage deposit and first month's rent on a new place in Leslieville. $1,200, from the leftover from my mother's surgery fund. I asked my mother about it later. She said they'd had a bit extra and it seemed wasteful not to help. She said it like the money had grown on its own, like it had nothing to do with me. That was the moment I understood the structure. In my family there is one child who is the project. High maintenance, always in some kind of crisis, emotionally necessary, and there is me. I am the line of credit that my family had collectively decided had no interest rate, and no repayment terms and no limit. But I had limits. It just took them locking me out of my own home to show me where they were. The next morning I called my lawyer. She's a real estate and civil litigator named Miss Hartwell, sharp and unsentimental, and she has been handling my contracts since I first started freelancing. I told her what happened. "I want them out today," I said. "I want the police." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Here's your problem." The building superintendent confirmed that my brother had spoken to him 2 days earlier, and said he was helping his sister move some things in while she was away on work. The super had let him borrow a fob. In Ontario, she explained, if someone has been in a dwelling for any period, with apparent permission, even implied permission, and there is a pregnant woman involved, you cannot physically remove them without going through the Landlord and Tenant board, and the LTB backlog right now is 8 to 14 months. 8 to 14 months. They were counting on that. They knew I traveled for work. They knew I wouldn't want the optics of dragging a woman in her 3rd trimester into a Toronto February. They had built their whole play around my conscience. I hung up and looked out the hotel window at the gray lake. My brother had always been smarter about people than I gave him credit for. He understood instinctively that I would not want to make a scene, that I would want to handle things quietly, that I would, if pushed, probably just write a check to make it go away. He wasn't wrong about most of that. But he'd made one miscalculation. He assumed I would move faster than him. He assumed I would panic and react. He didn't account for the possibility that I might go completely still. I took 3 days. I checked into the Marriott for the week, told work I was remote-based for a project, and I went dark on my family. I didn't call my brother. I didn't respond to my mother's text asking if we could all sit down and talk this through like adults. I let them sit in my condo with my good coffee and my good knives and my view of the city, and I let them believe they had won. Because arrogant people get comfortable, and comfortable people stop reading the fine print. What I did in those 3 days was research. I'm a financial compliance consultant. I spend my professional life finding the exact place where someone's story doesn't line up with their paper trail. I am genuinely very good at this. I started with what I knew. My brother had no assets. I knew that much from years of watching him rotate through jobs and apartments. But I also knew he'd gone through something a couple of years back. Some kind of legal trouble with a previous landlord, a dispute over damages. I had a vague memory of my mother mentioning it, and then quickly changing the subject. I pulled the Ontario court records. It took about 40 minutes and a CANLII search. There it was. 18 months ago, my brother had been the respondent in a small claims court action. The landlord had won a judgment of $8,400 for unpaid rent and property damage. My brother had filed a financial disclosure as part of the proceedings, a sworn statement of his income and assets. Income, 0 between contracts, savings, assets a 2009 Honda Civic, value approximately $3,200. He had signed it under oath. He had sworn before the court that he was functionally insolvent. Now, here is where it gets useful. My brother and Vanessa had been on my case for months, before the lockout, about getting on the deed of my condo. Not buying in, just being added. They had framed it as a safety thing, for the baby, for stability, for what if stotable, for what if something happened to me. I had always said no, but they kept asking. And I had recently discovered, through a friend in the building, that my brother had been telling people in the building's WhatsApp group that he co-owned the unit. He'd shown the superintendent a screenshot of an old text I'd sent him with my door code, and told him I'd given him co-access permanently. So here was the lie he needed to maintain, that he had some legitimate claim to my property, some financial stake, some history of contributing. And here was the trap. I called my brother from a number he wouldn't recognize. I let it ring 4 times, and when he answered I softened my voice. I told him I was exhausted. I told him I didn't want to fight. I said I'd been thinking about what he'd said about stability and the baby, and maybe he was right. Maybe it made sense to add him to the deed. He covered the phone. I could hear him whispering to Vanessa's, and when he came back his voice had this careful quality, like he was trying not to sound too pleased. I think that's the right call, he said. For the family. There's just a process, I said. The Condo Corporation requires a co-ownership declaration. It's a standard form. You have to swear that you've been a financial contributor to the property, that you have legitimate equity interest. It's for the building's records, not the government. Just internal. But it has to be notarized. Okay, he said. That's fine. It needs to say that you contributed to the original purchase, I said. Specifically, that you provided $50,000 toward my down payment that I was holding on your behalf. That's how we establish your equity share on paper. A pause. I mean, yeah. We talked about that at the time, right? When you bought. We had not talked about that. There was no such conversation, but he was already building the story in his head. Already retrofitting the history, because that is what he does. He is a revisionist by nature. Right, I said. So we just need to put that in writing. My lawyer will draft it. We'll do it at her office, make it official. When? He asked. Thursday, I said. I called Miss Hartwell back and told her to set up the meeting. I told her what I needed. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "You know what you're doing here." "I do," I said. She said, "I want that on record too." I said, "That's why I'm calling you." The meeting was at her office on Bay Street. Glass and chrome. The kind of place that is deliberately designed to make you feel like paperwork has consequences. I arrived early. Miss Hartwell's assistant had set up a small camera on a tripod. Standard practice, she would tell my brother, for notarized declarations, everything goes on the record for the corporation's file. There was also a court reporter, a woman named. She introduced herself only as the reporter, who sat at the end of the table with a stenography machine. My brother arrived 12 minutes late with Vanessa, who was enormous and uncomfortable, and scanning the room, with the expression of someone who expected to be celebrated. My brother had dressed up. He was wearing a blazer. He shook Miss Hartwell's hand like he was the one granting a meeting. "Let's get this done," he said. "Vanessa needs to get off her feet." Miss Hartwell did not smile. She said, "Before we proceed, I need to read you something." She picked up a single sheet of paper. "This is a sworn co-ownership declaration. You will be attesting, under penalty of perjury, that you contributed $50,000 to the purchase of the condominium unit at 14C, and that these funds were held in trust by your sister, on your behalf as legitimate equity. If this declaration is found to conflict with any other sworn financial statement or court record, you may be subject to charges of perjury and fraud. Do you understand?" My brother laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound. "It's just paperwork for the building," he said. "You don't need to make it weird." "It is also a legal document," Miss Hartwell said, her voice completely level. I understand, my brother said. He picked up the pen. Where do I sign? This was the moment. A careful person would have stopped. A careful person would have heard the words perjury and court record and felt some small warning bell. But my brother had already decided I was folding. He had decided this was his coronation. He had decided he was smarter than the room. He signed with his full name clearly, for the camera. Vanessa signed as a witness. My brother set the pen down and looked at me. Okay, he said. Now we do the deed transfer. I didn't touch the deed. I looked at Miss Hartwell. She opened a folder and placed a stapled document on top of the declaration he had just signed. He looked at it. It was a printout from CANLII, the small claims court record, 18 months old. His sworn financial disclosure, his signature at the bottom, swearing he had zero assets and zero savings. I watched his face. The process was interesting. First confusion, then a very fast, very visible calculation, then something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. That's old, he said. That was a different situation. You signed this document 18 months ago, Mrs. Hartwell said, tapping it, swearing under oath that you had no savings, no assets, no financial resources of any kind. She tapped the new declaration. You just signed this document swearing that at that same period, you had $50,000 in funds held on trust. These two statements cannot both be true. I found money, he said. After, from Gran's estate. Gran passed 4 years ago, I said. And you told me at the funeral you got her sewing machine. He looked at me. His jaw moved but nothing came out. Vanessa said, this is a setup. Her voice had gone thin and high. It is a legal proceeding, Miss Hartwell said calmly, being recorded in full. What it documents is that you have made 2 contradictory sworn statements. I am obligated, as an officer of the court, to report this to the relevant authorities. This recording and both signed documents will be filed with the court. My brother pushed back from the table. You can't use that. I didn't know what I was signing. You were read the declaration in full, Miss Hartwell said. The camera has that. We're family. He said it like that meant something structural, like it was a legal term. I'm a lawyer, Miss Hartwell said. My obligation is to the law. He looked at me then. Really looked at me, maybe for the first time since we were kids. I don't know what he expected to find. He said my name. Just my name. Like a question. I want to be honest about how that felt. It wasn't triumphant. It was quiet and heavy and sad in a way I hadn't anticipated. Because he was my brother and I had loved him for a long time before I understood what that cost me. See, you locked me out of my home, I said. You told the superintendent you co-owned my property. You moved your girlfriend in without asking me. And when I didn't fight back immediately, you assumed I was surrendering. I kept my voice even. You mistook patience for weakness. I've been doing that my whole life. He stood up. He was going to say something else. I could see it building. But Miss Hartwell cut him off. The police had been notified as a precaution, she said. There are 2 officers waiting downstairs. They will escort you from the building. If you return to the condominium at 14C, you will be removed as a trespasser. Under Ontario law, your access was obtained under false pretenses, and no tenancy has been legally established. You have until 6 this evening to collect your belongings. Vanessa started crying. It was the loud kind, the kind meant to be heard. My brother put his arm around her, and for a second I saw something genuine in his face. Actual distress for her. Actual protectiveness, and that almost broke me. Because he did love her. That was real. It's just that loving her had made him willing to steal from me. They left. My brother didn't speak again on the way out. He didn't look back. I sat at the table for a while after they were gone. The court reporter packed her machine. Miss Hartwell poured 2 glasses of water and set one in front of me. People will tell you to take the high road. People will tell you that family is family. That there's always a way back. That burning a bridge only leaves you stranded. But those people have not had someone change the code on their own front door. They have not stood in a hallway holding their own groceries, while their brother explained to them why his girlfriend's comfort mattered more than their legal title to property. I don't think what I did was cruel. I think it was proportionate. I built a situation where the only way for my brother to get what he wanted was to put his dishonesty on the public record. He made that choice. I didn't make it for him. I just stopped making it easy for him to make it quietly. The fallout was fast. The court filing went through within a week. My brother was charged with perjury in relation to the small claims proceeding. The contradiction between his 2 sworn statements was unambiguous. Vanessa was removed from the condo by the officers that evening. She ended up at her mother's place in Mississauga, which I imagine was not what she had planned for her 3rd trimester, but it was a real home, with people who actually wanted her there. My parents did not speak to me for 2 months. My mother sent a single text that said you could have just talked to him. I did not respond. My father called once, left a voicemail I listened to 3 times, and eventually called back and said I understood he was hurt. But what happened had consequences for a reason, he said. We raised you both the same, I said. I know, that's the problem. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he'd call again sometime. I said okay, that's where we are. I still have the condo. I went back the night they left and walked through every room. and it felt smaller than I remembered, which is always the thing that happens, when a place has been occupied by people who don't belong there. They leave a residue. Something that takes a while to clear. I opened all the windows even though it was February, and let the cold come through, and I stood in my own kitchen and made tea and watched the city. The CN Tower was doing its thing in the dark. My brother's case is still working through the courts. I don't follow it closely. I have a new door code and a note on file with the superintendent, and a very clear conversation with building management about what authorized access means. My niece was born in April. Healthy, from what I've heard through the one cousin who still talks to everyone. I hope she's okay. I hope her parents figure out how to be people, who don't take things that aren't theirs. I hope she grows up in a house where the word family means something other than who has the most leverage. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, you know exactly why I didn't hesitate. Hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, would you have pushed the button? Or would you have found a way to forgive them first?